Jasky Singh, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
So, how do we have better conversations?
Fuck, straight into it, eh? Better conversations. You mean just with the stranger, with each other?
Well, you've interviewed how many people now, do you reckon?
Well, very good question. How many have I interviewed? So let's say, I would just take a rough guess. I would say at least 5,000 people over that time.
So what's a common thread that connects all these strangers? What is something you've observed that humans have in us but we aren't able to capture in conversations?
The one thing you do realize, which I knew like theoretically, but in practice, when you speak to that many people, you start to realize that everyone has a unique point of view on the world, except for like really boring fucking, am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
Yeah, really boring fucking people, and they have no point of view and they shouldn't be talked to. But most people have a really interesting point of view, and if you can extract that it doesn't need to be funny, because the humor is in the fact that they're open and honest about their perspective on the world, right? So if I can disarm you enough, develop enough of a rapport quickly enough, which is the hard part, right? Because it's not like this sort of setting where I voluntarily come here, we're doing a podcast, we're here to talk to each other. I'm stopping you while you're midst of like, I don't know, doing your shopping or something. So there I'm like, how do I firstly disarm you very quickly? That comes down to skill, so I've had to learn that. But there's no real common thread, but I think the thing that I look for, or I think is interesting, is trying to find that unique point of view.
So what skills have you learnt to disarm people and get them sharing their unique point of view?
Yeah, very good question. I think the main thing isn't actually words. Not what you say, it's how you are perceived, right? So I could say anything. I could say the thing that aligns with you most. What's like one of your hobbies, for example?
Reading books, learning.
Reading books. Unusual for your demographic.
Yeah, I'm not the ordinary man.
Good. Reading books. I like it. So even if I said, I read 50 Shades of Grey, because that sounds like down your alley. So you would still be like, weird, right? But if I said it in a way that seems disarming. So for example, if I come out with like my shoulders back and chest stuck out, it's a little bit intimidating. So you'll start to see, which I get roasted on the comments all the time. They're like, why is your back like a skate ramp? Because I'm always like hunched in. But it's like, it's something I've learned is where if someone walks up and they look like a bit of an idiot, they look a little bit, I don't know, like
aloof.
Yeah, aloof, and a bit like you would see someone drunk in a club, right? Yeah. They're like, what a fucking idiot. Like, just have a bit of a laugh, right? So you want to curate that initial bit of disarming. Like if you're trying to pick up a girl in a club, which I don't know if it happens these days all on apps and shit. Back in the days we used to have to do that. So I used to do a lot of like trying to approach girls and see if we could start a conversation. A lot of that comes in is if you're intimidating, if your tonality is like, hey, how you doing? Like fucking back up, right? So it's less about the words you say. It's about body language. It's about tonality of voice. It's how you're looking at the person. If I'm fidgeting with my eyes, they're like, oh, this guy's dangerous. Whereas if I'm looking at you in the eyes, but with a soft gaze and, kind of alternating, so I'm not like death staring you, then a lot of those things disarm very quickly. And I could say anything. Like you're saying your interest might be books. I could say, I hate reading books. But you'd be like, oh, let's have a conversation. Even though it doesn't align with, does that make sense?
So how did that journey start from when day one, first interview, to over 5,000 people now? How has your personal skills evolved?
Dramatically, yeah. Dramatically.
Yeah, so did you have to learn this, or was this something natural? Because people probably think naturally very extroverted, this is something you've always been good at, or is this a skill that has just slowly evolved?
No, this is what's really interesting is when I was young, so I don't know what age, but I would just, as a placeholder, year threes when I moved to Australia. So how old are you? Like 10, 9?
Yeah.
Around 9 years of age to most of my teens, I was actually very scared of talking to people. Like I couldn't look people in the eyes. Like I would get really nervous. I was very unable to hold a conversation with a person for a long time. And I would get like, just like fidgety. I'd want to just end the conversation because I'm like, fuck, I'm just too nervous, like sweating and all that shit. And so it becomes like this vendetta against the thing. And you're like, I just need to get better at this, because the thing you struggle with the most is what you try and some people.
Your voids become your values.
There you go. Well-read person. So it is. It's the thing where, like, the thing you're the most biggest weakness, or the thing that you find is the biggest hurdle, if you have that internal, like, which is built in by your parents, is that initial motivation to improve, and you kind of think this is the biggest hurdle I want to get better at. It's essentially the journey of like those 15 years or 20 years of just working on that one thing, which most people only know me from the interviews and stuff, because that's only the really big public facing thing that I do. But I've been doing business for years, which essentially summarizes in sales. So I've just been doing sales, like cold calls, picking up the phone, trying to speak to strangers, which takes away the body language, the in-person interaction. It's all your ability to disarm someone over the phone. And that's how I grew up business, which, you know, now has 24 staff. It's a you know, one of the largest providers in that space. Not for it to be a flex, just to say that it's all sales that's driven that. And the first time I had to make that call, man, I was literally like, I'd rather just jump off a cliff right now. This is the most nerve-wracking. And again, same thing, make the call. Within a few minutes, I'm like, I just want to hang up. So it's constantly working at that. Your discomfort, you've got to get comfortable with it. So it's kind of finding, how do I keep getting more comfortable with that thing, which is a very introspective approach. You got to keep finding where you're feeling that discomfort and keep going towards it. And that's essentially now what every path has taken, is to try and get better at having conversations, because I was so scared of doing that as a kid.
How is selling, the skill of selling, sort of overlap with conversations with strangers?
That's all it is. That's the whole skill, is to call someone who's not expecting a phone call, is in the midst of doing something, is normally annoyed that you've tried to call them because you're taking time away from their thing. And now you're trying to get them to take the next step, which is moving them towards a sale, which is exhilarating for someone who's mentally deranged like me. Like, it's exhilarating. It's like, man, this person, Egan didn't want me to call him, and now we're going to have a meeting. And then from the meeting, maybe I'm going to make money from this and benefit Egan. So it's like it's real-time problem solving.
Most people are scared of talking to strangers. What simple practical tools would you give someone to build rapport and disarm the other person?
Well, disarm, the same thing, is if you're doing it in person, like I said before, is less about the words. And I think that takes a lot of fear away from people, is to not worry so much about the words. It is about eye contact, soft eye contact. And it's hard to describe what soft eye contact is, but I think, you know, when you're doing hard eye contact. So yeah, so don't do that. Like, don't do that thing. That's really weird. And just alternate, like, look at the person and then, you know, like, and then there's a small line between soft eye contact and it becoming weirdly sexual, because if you start going down to the lips, then it's creepy, right? So it's such a nuanced skill. So eye contact. There is also smile, helps a lot, right? People look at someone and they're just looking at them with no, like, movement of their mouth. Just a slight, like, again, it can get creepy very quickly. So slight smile, like, good, like I'm trying to do now. It disarms you a little bit, right? Your smile helps disarm. And then body language. It's, again, dependent on the situation. If you're having a meeting and you want to assert power, your body language needs to be powerful. If you want to fake power, because sometimes you need to do that to make yourself feel powerful, you can do that. And just, you know, shoulders back, back, down, chest out a little bit. If you want to be in my situation where you're going up to strangers and trying to have a conversation, say you're trying to pick up a girl at a club, don't do that. That is creepy, weird, and very, like, alienating. Whereas you got to be that aloof. Hey, what's going on? Like that. So you'll notice a lot of I try to do it. It's not always successful. Is the initial approach is a very high tonality. Hey, what's going on, man? Like, it's, weird kind of guy, right? But if it's like, hey, what's up, man? Bit different, right? Doesn't matter what you say. Hey, fuck you, man. You might be like, oh, good. Like, but if someone approaches you saying, hey, fuck you, man, you'd be like, dude, where's my knife, right? So those are the things. Disarming is all about body language and your fabricated persona in that moment for the situation. You kind of got to be a chameleon.
A skill I think I've seen you employ very well is this concept that Chris Williamson talks about called reverse charisma. People don't remember, or people remember how you made them feel, and you make people feel interesting, and people love talking about themselves. So what I notice is you're able to get people to share the things about themselves that make them appear special and interesting, which at the core of us, we all want to be seen as that. So I think it's people go into conversations, think, I have to be interesting, I have to portray myself as this person, but it's all about how you make them feel.
Very true. And a lot of it is about taking the pressure off. If I came into this podcast and I'm like, I have to deliver everything here, it's a lot of pressure. And which is okay, right? Like that's part of the dance of the guest. Like the guest got to bring something. If I'm boring as shit, this is going to be terrible. And so it is going to be terrible. But I think generally in that situation is humor is so valuable in every situation, because there's always tension when there's no humor. You make a couple of jokes at your expense, relaxes people. That's another very big disarming part of the toolkit, but it's not something that I recommend because it's hard. If you put the pressure of trying to be funny, that's quite difficult for a lot of people, because humor is also subjective, right? So if you try and say some shit and it's not funny, you've done the opposite of disarming, right? But sorry, to answer your question, I don't really think of it like that. I don't think I'm going to spotlight this person and make them feel special or amazing. That's not really what I go in for, because I know, and I get it a lot of the times, I'll go up to someone, be like, hey, what's going on? Oh, nothing much, man. Hey, I just want to tell you, I'm really not that exciting. There's nothing exciting about me. I'm really boring, man. So you might want to move on to the next. And I'm like, what that person doesn't realize is 90% of people say that exact same thing. And everyone thinks I have nothing interesting about me. Like, unless you're some narcissistic Ted Bundy psycho who just thinks I'm the most interesting person. Most people think they're bland, but every person is really interesting. Like I said, as a kid, always struggled with developing rapport, conversations with people. So just developed this weird curiosity in people. Like, I'm so curious about the little details of people. Like, I come in here, I'm like, man, why did this guy set up this thing in this basement? Like, what does he want to do with this podcast? Like, what's his ambition? What's his desire? This is a unique place to set up, and what excites him? Like, I don't know. I find that exciting. And why do I find it exciting? Because a lot of people think that's like really boring. They're all obsessed with themselves. I find it more exciting to know about another person, because that's, I don't know, weirdly, those nuances are interesting.
Do you feel like that's been driven in any way for a desire for deeper connection with others? Because for me, I started a podcast because I didn't feel like I was understood by the world, and I wanted to connect with people, learn from them. But at the core of it, you're having a connection with a stranger. Is that what drove a lot of your curiosity? Probably,
but it was more, I think, just I can't trace it back to the point of zero and moving forward from there to know what my curiosity was then. But I think being a migrant, coming to the country at a young age where you're curious about everything, because everything is different to where you came from. Like, say if I was, because originally from India, if I was in India, it's like, this is your normal space. Coming here as a young kid, you're like, oh, why is this guy doing this? Why does he talk like this? What the fuck is this kangaroo? Like, all these like kind of unusual things. So maybe develop that level of curiosity. But I think it was just, I'm only looking at it in hindsight, is like, how do you develop curiosity? Because that's more valuable to people than hearing me rant about why I'm curious. Is, I think it's like very, very interesting. By knowing what drives another person, what they think, it sharpens your thinking. So if you even look at it from a self-beneficial purpose, is to go, can I understand how this person has made these decisions to get to where he is or she is, and where this person is looking forward? And just having that level of curiosity can make you learn or do things better yourself, right? So even if you look at it from a whatever, like a personal perspective, as opposed to just being curious from an altruistic perspective, it's beneficial.
People struggle to ask questions. What's your framework for asking questions? Is it just natural and instinctual, or how do you selectively ask the right questions?
Yeah, I've got to the point that I just let it go. I don't try and create a scaffolding, because what I've done in the past is create some sort of structure about these are the questions I'm going to ask, and I miss the string that's the most interesting.
So listening, that's something I learned. So when I started the podcast, it was a bunch of, 50 questions. And then what I noticed myself doing is not actually listening to what they're saying, but looking at the script and constantly referring back to what's the next thing I've got to say. But
I could see you were thinking of the next question while I'm answering the question, which is normal.
Yeah.
Right? That's normal.
So what I've been trying to do is, listen to exactly what they're saying. And normally there's a thread to continue down that thing, and the conversation starts to deepen and evolve rather than sort of pivoting off to the next part of the question.
Well, here's what's really interesting. And I've learned this from specifically doing these street interviews, is because you see the response. You post the video and then you see the response of what people enjoy. And it's also when I used to do stand-up comedy, which is what got me into this. We don't have to go into that. But what you start to realize is, and I think it was a quote from, I might get this wrong, but I think it was a quote from Jerry Seinfeld to Louis C.K., right? Most people know these two comedians, right? Very, very famous comedians. And Louis C.K. early on in his ascent in comedy, Jerry Seinfeld pulled him up after he did a set and was like, hey, you started that bit and then you moved on to another bit. He said, why didn't you just dig down? Because you got to laugh. Why didn't you dig down further on that bit? And Louis was like, oh, I thought it was done. I got the laugh. He's like, you've already done the hard work of getting that first laugh. Now, if you continue to like just kind of drill further and further into that little string that you pulled, you'll realize there's a gold mine underneath that bit. And I think his words was like, stay in the bit for as long as you can. As long as you can. The reason I mention that is because you'll notice in conversations, it's when you're talking about one strain of conversation, if you can continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper, the depth is a lot more interesting to everyone as opposed to just width, right? So if we started talk, what do we talk about? Let's say we talked about disarming, right? Let's say we had 1 hour just talking about disarming. Weirdly enough, people find that a lot more interesting than knowing about, what's his thought on cushions? Like moving to another thing, like that's fucking boring. Like that's a terrible example. But like all the questions you've asked, very interesting. But what I've realized is we used to do compilations, meaning I would have a type of question I would ask 20 people and turn that into a video. Fucking tanked. Then I would do like, maybe 3 people will talk about something similar. Average performance. Then what I realized is like, man, I don't even find this fucking thing interesting. Why am I trying to make compilations? I was like, what I find interesting is I met Egan. I went deep into this one thing about him and just kept digging for like 7 minutes. And I was like, look, I find that interesting. Let's just post that. Moment we started doing that, it was like the views went like this. Because inherently that's what's funny, because you stretched that string to the point it's about to break. But also it becomes hilarious. Like, oh, you disarm with body language. So what do you actually do? Do you like bring your shoulders down? Like, where's your arm go? Like, okay, what about your breathing? Like, you just keep going so deep into it. And that already is like hilarious and also so interesting, as opposed to me moving from that and going, why did you decide to wear shorts today? Because it's like, fuck, I just wanted to really hear about that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the analogy I'm thinking is you're digging for gold and then you get your first little nugget of gold. But instead of digging further, you're looking in a different direction now.
We feel when we're having that conversation that I think that part is done. But you don't realize that part can go for so much longer and is so much more interesting to everyone. Like I enjoy talking about, say, the same thing but in great depth. Could be the same thing that obviously it's got to be interesting. Like I said, cushions, we couldn't stretch that.
We could try.
We could try. We could have a 1 hour podcast on orange cushions. But also if it's comedy, like mine's comedy. So to make it funny, it's hilarious to go for 5 minutes on a mundane topic that just gets stretched. And then you get into the nuances of every little bit. I just find that fucking hilarious.
What is interesting in people's stories? You said everyone's got a different worldview. How are people's views different from each other?
Well, it depends on your upbringing. It depends on your experiences. Depends on your nurture, your nature, everything. It's everyone's completely different. The stamp on one person is completely different to the stamp on another person, and everyone has a unique point of view depending on what experiences they had in their life.
Okay. Interesting. What about storytelling? What have you learnt from, I feel like a massive thing that people love is, being able to tell a story is very important. And people struggle to tell a story in a good way. What have you learnt about that?
Well, I think, again, I don't know where I heard this, but it was somewhere, I think maybe I read it somewhere, is your brain responds to like a visual, like say you're watching a Netflix movie. Your brain has the same, when they do like a brain scan, what is it, fMRI or something, like it's like sees the brain waves and different parts of your brain lighting up depending on what's being activated when you're watching that movie, for example. It's exactly the same as if you're being verbally told a story. Like it actually creates those same imagery in your brain, and because you have to like now visualize the story you're being told. So if I'm telling you a story about me being a child and coming to this country and doing this and speaking to people and learning about Australian culture, excuse me, you're visualizing how that looks in your brain the same way as if it was a movie. So it's like kind of an immersive experience for you. And that's why, again, evolution has happened through story. Like a lot of the ways we form groups with one another, a lot of the ways of religion is all just a story that's been told across so many generations. The reason I preface that is I think there's nothing that gets you to connect and turn on different parts of the brain as a story does. Because a story, you have to create the scene in your head. You have to listen to parts of the story. And also, it's human nature to want to know how the thing ends, right? You just want to know, like, where did this go? Like, oh, you started this thing. I want to know, like, is it going in this direction? What happened? And if someone leaves you halfway through a story, you're fucking annoyed. I can sit through a shit movie because I just want to know how it ends. It's just like human nature. So in saying that, story is incredibly, incredibly powerful. But story, again, I've read so many books on how to tell a better story. It's such a hard skill. Like, it's such a hard skill. One of the best storytellers when it comes to comedy is like Dave Chappelle. You're familiar with his comedy? So he tells stories in such an immersive way because you got an audience and you're trying to make them be at the same frequency because they're all listening to the story at the same time. And it's this, and the way like he delivers, like he'll slow down, and then he'll talk slowly, then he'll speed up, and then it's incredible. And learning to tell stories can engage someone like this and help you sell. The best way to sell is to tell a story.
I think a lot of people struggle to, I guess, share their own story and connect with strangers. So I was just curious to your perspective on how to, I guess, express something internal to other people. So what sort of, I guess, how do you sort of think about sharing something of yourself to other people? Like when you connect with a stranger, how are you thinking about that?
Well, the most important part of that is also the disarming phase, where if I'm constantly asking questions, then it becomes a lot of pressure on that person to keep delivering answers. So if I'm not backing that up with saying something about myself, one, it allows them time to think. Like if you talk for a while, it gives me time to think. So if I'm like giving you very short, like, hey, tell me your thoughts on microphones. Oh, but if I give you time and go, hey, when I bought my first microphone, I thought it was, going to be, I always use the worst things to talk about, like microphones. But like it gives you breathing room. It gives relatability because you can talk about your experience and it allows that person to then talk about their experience. If I want someone to open up as much as possible, because a lot of the times you'll notice people's people's thoughts on the videos are like, dude, you met this random person and they told you their entire life story. That's fucking wild. And a lot of the times that happens is obviously the whole thing I've gone ad nauseum about it is the disarming early on. But also it is about saying something vulnerable yourself, and then reciprocity, they say it, they open up. It gives them the platform to open up, right? So there's people that have shared the fact that they saw someone commit suicide, and they shared deaths in their family. They've shared about not only like talking about death, is about their own like mental struggles with whatever, like depression and anxiety, all this stuff, family violence, like everything. I've had everything shared on the channel, and I think a lot of it is I'll share something myself. It's like, hey, I'm putting it out there, and that brings them a little bit like of a platform to share it, vice versa. But also you've got to understand a lot of people don't have people talking to them. People are not having conversations as much these days. It's like fucking texting and WhatsApping and all this kind of jazz and messaging people and swiping and fucking whatever, emails. So having a one-on-one conversation, a lot of the times people are like, yeah, I get a chance to unload. And that just gives them a chance to speak to someone, because I'm speaking to all kinds of people. Whereas a lot of the white-collar workers or people that are in professional roles, they're communicating all day, just most of the time just talking about just fucking total bullshit. So it gives them a chance to talk about something real. And also like people that are of a lower socioeconomic background, or like people that don't, a lot of the time people just ignore them. They think, oh, this person's not interesting, or they try and avoid them. Whereas I'll speak to everyone and they get a chance to actually talk, which doesn't happen as much these days.
I think framing your own anxiety to talk to strangers as thinking about how much you would like to share your story, connect with someone else. I think it's that egocentric bias where we don't understand that what's personal is universal. Everyone wants to express and be seen and share their story. And we think that people are out there to judge us and attack. There's a lot of cynicism in the world. I'm curious to your perspective. You've met a lot of people from diverse backgrounds, a lot of people who think there's a lot of hate, negativity and toxicity in the world. What's your perspective on, I guess, society in general?
It'd be interesting to ask you, because you're in the kind of generation which, I don't know, I feel like that's where it's stemming from. What do you feel?
What I feel is, I think social media biases us, because on social media, there's a tendency for only speaking about things when you have an extreme view. So if you're very leftist or very right, whereas I think most people are in the middle grounds, but there's not enough activation energy to speak about that. I think we are biased towards how much we think people actually think extremely. I think most of us have more balanced views on everything, but what we're confronted with on social media is just extreme views on any sort of topic, left and right, conservative, progressive. But I think the average person has a more balanced approach, and I think we can start to think the world's more negative and toxic than it actually is, because that's all we're seeing on our screens.
So interesting question is, how often have you left a hate comment?
Never. Oh, once.
How often have you left a hate comment? Exactly, right? Like the reason I ask that is, you guys are normal people. You guys use social media all the time. How often have you just fired off a hate comment? Very rarely, man. Very rarely. So, I mean, I've done it maybe once or twice, but I don't even know if it classifies as a hate comment. I was just probably fucking trolling, but it probably is hate, because that is kind of the same category. I used to, I mean, a bit of a tangent, but when I was when I started Twitter, I used to follow a lot of the Bollywood actors and actresses, and just send the most like triggering like tweets out to them, just for the pure exercise, because it was hilarious. I just used to love doing it, but also to see if they would respond. And I was like, there's no way these people with millions and millions of followers and like billions of people in the country that like obsess over them, that one random guy with 6 followers in Perth with some like obscene profile picture is going to get them to respond. And no fucking joke, I would get at least maybe 1 out of 20 of them to respond to something and dish back more hate. So I was like, this is insane that like we are all so bothered by the hate from some unknown person that it triggers them to actually respond. And I mean, that account would not be allowed in this part of in this time of the world, because it was just like, it was terrible. Like the kind of things I said were horrendous. But what I'm getting at is a lot of normal people are not out there writing hate comments. We use social media all the time. Whereas like, I don't know what the statistics are. I mean, many people have talked about it. It's like a very small fringe of people who are leaving all the hate comments. And these people are generally people that don't have much going on in their life. They're not in a negative way. They don't have social connections. They maybe don't have a fulfilling job. They don't have like some ambition. Because if you're focused on doing something, you're not out there really like commenting on other people's shit. You're watching them and going, oh man, that guy girl did something really cool. Maybe I can incorporate it. Or how do I learn more about improv comedy so I can use it more on the streets to improve my thing? Oh, how do I learn more sales? Maybe I'll follow. You're like, your brain is completely immersed with trying to get better at the thing. You're not out there firing off hate comments at some guy who like interviewed a guy in Manchester. No one gives a shit. Like you're not, that's not consuming your energy, because you write that hate comment. Now you've taken energy out of your brain to now focus on who will respond to that hate comment. It's like unnecessary. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it's like, it is all the people in the fringes, whereas it is the younger generation where a lot of those people I feel don't have social connections. They haven't developed those family bonds. Everyone's very individual, and they just, and the world is different. It's hard these days for a younger person to like have affordability of a lot of things that was just given back in previous generations. So yeah, I think I don't know, I think it was just like a Gary Vee quote who said, if someone hates on your videos, don't think of it as hate towards you. Think of it as like, what's wrong with that person? That just frames it a little bit better, because like there's 3 of us here and none of us really leave hate comments. I'm sure if we spoke to a whole bunch of people around, there'd be that one person out of 100 who says, yeah, I've left a few hate comments. And you kind of wonder, why did you leave it? Because maybe something they were missing, they saw in that video and they're like, I wish I had that thing. So they decide to hate, to bring that person down.
Yeah, people resent the things in you that they shame in themselves. So like, if someone's very expressive and confident, they're going to judge that because, you know, they're judging the part of themselves that can't put themselves out there. I noticed that a lot with what I was doing when I started podcasting, is a lot of the negativity, it's simply not about the specifics of this post. It's always about someone doing something that reflects something within inside of them. It's the expression, it's the ability to put something that means something to them, to follow something that matters to them, so that if they want to bring you down because it makes them feel better about themselves.
I think, and I think that helped me, and it might help someone that's putting out a lot of videos and starts doing something. It's like the gladiator like tunnel. You've got to initially, it's like the hazing. You're going through the tunnel at the start, and when someone sees something new, they don't know who I am. They've never seen me. It's this new person that's come up on their feed. Like, fuck this guy. Like, who is this? Oh, what a fucking knob. And there's all these like, it's an avalanche of hate. For the first like 6 months, I think the ratio was probably like 60% hate comments and 40% positive. No matter what I posted, it could be the most heartfelt story. And they're like, that guy was sharing his opinion and you're a fuckwit. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, I was just talking to the guy. It's like, oh, look at your face. Your head's like a fucking potato. It would just go out of control, man. And like, I had comments of people saying, yeah, you got a fucked up shaped head. And I'm like, dude, I'm mostly wearing a hat. How you even, what are you, X-ray vision, motherfucker? So it is like the initial period where you're going to get a ton of hate. Unless, I mean, in what I'm doing, that's expected. I'm approaching strangers. It's a raw, mostly unedited, like an unfiltered conversation and leaning towards comedy. So there is laughter at the expense of something, right? That's just laughter. It's the expense of something. And sometimes it can be at the expense of that person. It can be at the expense of me. It can be trying to avoid at the expense of that person, but sometimes that happens. It's just a raw depiction of what took place. So anyway, so you get that ton of hate, and then it's like they're testing you. They're like, how hard can I punch this person to get them to stop? because they're doing something that I wish I could do. Or I'm not saying that's what people wish they want to do what I'm doing, but wish about creating. Because a lot of people want to create stuff. Everyone's creative. Go, can I just punch this fucking guy or girl enough that they stop? Because I've won, right? I didn't know that at that time, but then I'm like, and then there was like this, you're moving through that tunnel, you move, and then you see the light, and at the other end, then the ratio started turning. It was like 30% hate, 70% positive. Then more and more and more, and now I've been doing it for like 2.5 years, and you start to notice that like people leave hate comments, and then people jump on that person leaving hate comments like, you're a fuckwit, like at these other people. And I'm like, now I've got people in the comments supporting me when someone says something hateful because they've got a backlog of 2.5 years of knowing who I am and what I'm trying to do. And it is not to take the piss out of people or hurt people or whatever. And then it's like, oh, you've made it through. You're on the other side, and now people know you, people support you or follow you or whatever, and they go, I kind of get the picture of this person. So it's like so if it helps anyone, is like when you start something new, unless you're doing like the most heartfelt, you know, skipping through the wheat fields, happy days, like kind of nice thing in the world, no one's going to give you hate. But I feel like you're not creating something that anyone gives a fuck about, right? You've got to have a clear opinion that's going to be divisive to make it interesting. And everyone has that opinion. If you try and hide that opinion, when it comes out, you will get fucking plastered anyway. So why not just be yourself? Why worry about what people are going to say? Because they're going to hate you. They're going to try and punch you. Then you get to the other side. Those people that know what you're doing, they will then start to support you. And it's amazing. Like, I'll get hundreds of comments on a post, and there will still be hate. I don't know what the percentage is now. I don't look as much these days because it's not healthy. But you'll start to notice if there's a hate comment, like people are in there fighting for you, which is fucking amazing. And the one thing you could always have solace in is to know when you post something, when you did the thing, when you spoke to someone, when you created the thing, were you trying to be malicious? And if you were, that's on you. That is on you because you did it to hurt someone. You did it to be racist. You did it to be sexist. You did it to be whatever. Now, comedy is a gray line. There are sometimes I'm like, I don't think I was the best person in this situation. I laughed at this person's expense. But I'm like, I didn't know that at the time. Like maybe I didn't do it like I used to do it early on, like because it's like crowd work. A lot of the times you're roasting someone. So I stopped doing it, then a corrected course. And then I was like, oh, fuck, maybe that's still too far, a corrected course. And then people be like, oh, you're laughing at someone who's mentally ill. I'm like, I didn't even know that person's mentally ill. How would I know? I'm not a fucking therapist. I'm not knowing that everyone's got some sort of mental ailment. So anyway, you got to know, are you trying to be malicious? If you are, just don't do it. And then what does the hate matter? Or if you're trying to be malicious to be funny, that's on you as well because you're just doing it to be a fucking troll. But that's also sometimes hilarious. But yeah, I don't know. Like I think if you know deep within you're not being a total cunt to another person, then it's all right.
How do you discern that? Because I think a lot of people attach authenticity to outcomes. So they will justify whatever they do as long as they're seeing results from what they do. So how do you discern between something that's truly aligned, or is it just the performance of a post that convinces you that it is actually something that is positively intentioned?
Well, the performance is never going to indicate as positively intentioned, because a performance is performance based on the response or the quality of the video. And the more malicious thing you do, the more it's likely to perform well. You can be okay with that if that's what you want to do, but long term, that is going to catch up with you because you're just a dickhead. Like you're just going, like, to be honest, like legacy journalism is essentially that side, right? They can mask it very well by saying, oh, we're just reporting the shit. But if you look at a newspaper, look at any of these, like, it is just the worst shit. It is just the worst shit possible. Oh, that person went out and like cheated on this person, that person shot this. It's like they find the most fucked up shit going on and they just put a spotlight on it. And they don't care. They're like trying to be malicious, right? And it's fine. I'm not judging them. That's what they do. And then that gets money, that gets advertising because it gets views. But I don't think performance reflects anything positive. I think algorithms are positioning things that are horrible and dropping their performance to incentivize more positive stuff to be out there. But I think you've just got to know, like, are you okay with the kind of stuff you do? Because you know what you're doing, right? You know what you're doing. I know I'm just having conversations with people, and whatever the hell you say, whatever the hell you do, this is a conversation, right? And I have to try and make it entertaining and funny. That's my job. But if you say some fucked up shit, you said some. I didn't come here to get you to say fucked up shit. Sometimes people have said something terrible. I'm like, well, that's what it is. That's the conversation. But we do give them an out. At the end, it's like, hey, this is going to be distributed, posted, blah, 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 blah. Are you okay with it? If they say no, they say no, right? So there's 2 steps to it. And I'm like, that gives me enough comfort that I've given them the chance to have a conversation, and then also pull out if by the end you wanted to not post it. But that's me. And to be honest, a lot of the times a person will have that conversation, we post it, and then they go, I wish it wasn't posted, but it's too late. There's a lot of resources that go into putting that out at that point. So back to it. It's just, and you can do it whichever way you want. But long term, if you're just out trying to hurt people,
I think authenticity is very polarizing, and that's why I think a lot of people love this style content, because it sort of tests these social scripts and these conventions that everyone adheres to. It's like when autistic people are very like blatantly just speak their mind. They're open, like just say what they think. I think we're in a world that's so politically correct, where I think there's such a refreshing element of your content because people are able just to say it how it is. And I think people are so scared to get judged and put down. And I think we're in a world now where authenticity is being craved and appreciated, because it's fear. People fear to put themselves out there now. So the people who can actually stand out there alone and speak their mind, I think it's very, very engaging.
Spot on. Spot on. Because that's what I've always tried to do is if someone doesn't like me, they're not liking me, not some fabricated, sandpapered version of me that should be what people want me to be. Because in the end, like, they don't like me for all the rough edges that I have, then that's just me as a person. And if I can push it, because the thing is, initially it's changed now, and I think it's because of the political climate in America is like pushing it to a more free speech or like open like communication world on these platforms. But when I first started the content, like anything that would cross any sort of like fictional politically correct boundary would just get suppressed. So there was always that push to try and go, let's create more vanilla content, because in the middle it works. But I was like, I'm not doing this for the money. Like I never started this for the money. I've got like other things that I can do way better for money. This was a creative thing that was only to help me get better at conversations with people, because I wanted to get better at crowd work in comedy. And then I just started saying, well, fuck it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? But the main thing is to like allow people to say the things that they just want to say without like it always being like there being a worry about being yourself, right? Everything's about just trying to be yourself. And that's funny. It's hilarious. Like people just saying the shit they want to say is hilarious.
What's your opinion on being yourself versus sort of filtering and catering your behavior and adjusting what you say to sort of meet some social script or prescription of, how you're meant to show up in the world? Like, how do you balance like being authentic, but also, being respectful? And because there's a lot of people's opinions and beliefs are going to create conversation, like difficult conversation where people's opinions don't align. And I think it's meaningful to have those discussions, but at what point, like where is the context to have these conversations? Because if everyone just walked out in the world and, you meet someone and you're like, hey, I don't fucking like you. And then you still like, how can we progress as a society by having these conversations, but doing it in the right way? Because I think a lot of us, at least what I've realized when I've talked to a lot of people, is a lot of people want to talk about things, but they're too scared to. but I think people just don't know the right time or how to have it. Whether is it with a stranger or is it, you know, because not everyone's going to have a podcast interview to talk and have these discussions. So I think people want to have this and want to progress and develop conversations and have them, but they just don't know how to approach it. When's the right time, right context?
It's a layered question. I don't really know the answer, but I'll just give you what is my 2 cents and how I view it. Is there's a number of like different facets of my life where I have to be a different person. In a professional corporate environment, I can't be the person on the street interviews. There's no way. Like you'd lose every fucking job. You get those like weird like clients that just don't give a shit. So it's different. You have to. There are times like I have 2 young kids. I'm not going to go around saying fucking cunts. Like I'm not going to say that. That's not going to raise them in a very well mannered individual. So you have to. It's like a seesaw. You have to kind of like work it out depending on which environment you're in.
The skill that I think is important because at your core you still want to be authentic, right? But a skill called calibration, where you can sort of calibrate what you're saying to the context, so you can still be yourself. That's the like anchor point. But then if you can read the social cues, so when you're in public doing interviews, you know, the boundaries are way different to in a professional context.
And there's also desires and outcomes of each of those scenarios, right? In the video content creation world, what is interesting and what will perform is being yourself, is getting people to be themselves. So it is a lot more valuable in that scenario to be the person that I was describing. In a corporate environment, that's not the case. In that environment, it's the use of like thesaurus bashing, essentially trying to use the biggest words possible to sound smart. Works to some extent in a hierarchical, large corporation sort of model. Whereas in a one-to-one sales environment, it's different. You've got to, again, have a cadence. There's clients where I'll get on the phone and be like, hey, fucking, what's going on, bro? That's because I know that cadence. Whereas a new client, I'm never going to swear. I'm never going to say anything offensive. I'm never going to cross the line of politically incorrect. And how do you know that? Is you have to learn the skill. You have to learn how to talk to certain people in certain environments by just reading the room really well. And I'm not perfect at it, nowhere near perfect at it. Is the only way I've learned it is by doing things like sales. Cold calling is one of the most overarching, greatest skills you can teach anyone that I believe that's young, wants to learn a whole bunch of skills by doing one activity. It's like a umbrella activity that helps you get okay with rejection, that helps you be succinct, learn brevity, learn enunciation, clarity of speaking, changing intonation, all of that shit, right? And also at the same time, being okay with holding a conversation. It's an incredible skill, and it takes away the awkwardness of in-person communication. Next layer is in-person communication. But you learn all of that, you do that. And then I did stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy, completely different. It's a monologue. You're having to like just use words to get involuntary reactions from people. It's fucking hardcore. It's so difficult. I'm not very good at it, but I'm okay, right? But layering that on and then doing these street interviews and then doing meetings and public presentations and all that kind of stuff, which I just try and do a lot of it because I'm like, then go into a scenario, I'm like, there's really many scenarios I can be put into where I'm not going to have an okay conversation with a person. And I'm going to have to judge it. I get it wrong. There are times where I swear where I shouldn't have sworn. There are times when I say something politically incorrect and the person switches off. But there's also like an underlying foundation. You've got to know who and what are your goals. Who are part of your goals, right? If I say something on the fringes of politically incorrect and you get pissed off, you're probably not someone I want to really hang out with because that doesn't vibe with me anyway, right? Like if I say something highly offensive, that's different, right? Then I'm wrong. But I'm like, in my case, I don't want to be mates with someone who's just make the slightest joke and that person gets pissed off. That's not my kind of friend or my kind of client I'd want to deal with because I'll be constantly on edge. Right. Similarly, other things might be like, what are my goals? How much money do I want to make? I want to make this amount of money, but I want to hang with the people that are cool. So I can be okay with saying no to a bunch of clients where I have to do the song and dance to a level that I'm uncomfortable with. It's not myself, to just make the extra money that's marginally not going to have much impact on me. So, yeah, it's a deep answer, but that's how I position it. You just got to be okay with understanding things, trying enough stuff to know you can modify yourself without modifying yourself too much that you lose who you actually are.
I think it's a good filter if you're constantly trying to. The thing I always come back to is, because a lot of the time we say things and then we put it out there and we don't know how we feel about it, and we're sort of like waiting to see how that gets received, and then we sort of interpret whether it's it's simple conditioning, right?
Yep.
Like if you say something to someone and they positively respond, you're more inclined to keep doing the thing. That's where I think it can be hard to know what is truly something you value versus something you've been conditioned to value, because it has been, I guess, received well and it performs. I think that goes with content. People keep replicating content that the other people like, but I guess depends what you're valuing. Like, are you what outcome are you going for?
How do you figure out what you believe in?
Yeah, like something I learned from another podcast, Stephen Bartlett was talking about it, was like you don't choose your beliefs, right? Your beliefs get placed onto you through culture. You don't even have critical thinking until you're at least 7 years of age. So you're like a sponge to culture, society, your parents, your friends, these peers, everything that you get absorbed. And then you have to sort of go out into the world and start thinking and going, hey, does my true authentic self actually align with these things? And I think we don't actually have a true understanding of what we believe in. And I think a lot of us are saying things and we're waiting for the response. Whereas I don't think a lot of people, I think what bridges that gap is the courage to say something and let it land and see how it makes you feel. See, do I resonate with that? I think a lot of people are even scared to put their opinion out there. They don't that's the test. You say something, you put it out there and see how it makes you feel. Even with the performance, like how does it make me feel to actually speak something? Or no, that doesn't sit right. Maybe, and think about it. Do I truly align with this? Do I want this? But I think a lot of people get stuck in the prison of their mind that they never progress as an individual because they're too scared to be held accountable to what they're saying. Because there's a lot of like political correctness. And my friend told me this cool quote about friendship. You should be able to speak to your friends and not be held accountable to what you're saying. Like there should be a space and a capacity to have conversation and actually progress as individuals together for the purpose of betterment and improvement, instead of being held account. Like you say something, you have to live and die by exactly what you said. It's like, where is the room for growth and expansion?
Very well put, man. Yeah. I don't have anything to add. I
You
think you said it well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's about knowing the response.
Take me through, I guess, your favorite interview.
Yeah.
I know you've had a couple.
Everyone always asks me. Favorite interview.
What about you? I know you had a scary one with someone with a...
Yeah, try to cut themselves.
Yeah.
Or cut someone else. Favorite is a hard one because I think favorite in terms of like what performed well and what was like the response was enjoyable and it was enjoyable to do. There's quite a few. But I think the favorite has probably been turning something that wasn't going to be anything and then actually making it into a good interview. And there's a few that come up, but they're not actually my favorites. I can't think of a recent one. But yeah, it's always that someone that has high resistance or wants to exit the interview. And then I've had to use really easy ones, or the ones that are less heavy lifting, is they're already up for it. And they have good energy, and it's just me giving them enough prompts to get it to where I want it to go. Those are like, and they normally do really well. So if someone has good energy, I give them enough, and then we get to where we want to go, enough like maneuvering to a funny spot. Those are awesome. Like the Big Bash one you mentioned, all time, great. But that guy he carried it. He was amazing. I didn't have to do much. I just had to like ask the right questions to get him where he wanted and be comfortable enough to say the things that he said. And he was hilarious. So the people that haven't watched it, it's where this guy said he apparently played cricket, but the Big Bash League where he actually bashed a bunch of people. It was amazing. But the ones that actually, are the all-time ones for me, and I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, but it's the ones that where someone has not wanted to talk and I've got them to get somewhere. Nothing comes to mind. But
yeah, but when there's the high resistance and then you end up having it's probably because of the expectation, right? Like initially, this is not going anywhere, and then it surprises you.
Yeah. Which actually, one I just posted the other day. This is not an all-time one, but it's a perfect example of this. It's a guy who was in PPE gear. He was a tradesperson. He was lying on in the park at Scarborough Beach. So the contrast of that image of a guy in full trades gear lying just in a park opposite the beach was hilarious, because opposite the beach you normally see someone like in a beachy attire. This guy was in like full work gear. And immediately I was like, I got to go speak to this guy. And initially he was obviously like, what the fuck are you talking to me for? Like, he wasn't rude at all, but it was kind of like, can you just fuck off? But by the end of it, we had the most heartfelt, open conversation about him not being able to find a partner because all he does is work, and he's a little bit antisocial. So those ones are the ones that I really enjoy. Performance, they're not the most high-performing ones, but those are the ones that I go, great. Putting that one notch in the belt lets me get better for the next one. And those are the ones that I always go, fuck yeah. Like, I'm glad I was able to make that into something.
So reps under the belt is huge for improvement for yourself.
Yeah, more difficult reps. Like every time that bar gets higher, like I would have never approached that person 2 years back because I didn't have the skill set to do it.
Is it just confidence? Like, do you get like what prevents you from going up to someone? Like,
one, I would be a little bit nervous. I'm interrupting someone who's like lying there, probably sleeping or resting or whatever, and it's like, and it's not a very normal place to go speak to someone by sitting next to them. Like a seated interview is kind of weird. Then also it's like, where am I gonna? I'll probably exit it quite quickly because I'm like, where am I gonna take this? But yet I'm like, I'm confident in the fact that I will get this somewhere because I've done it 5,000 times. So there's that. And each time the bar gets higher. So it's like, well, where's the next one? Where's the next one? And and then in between that, you're doing the ones that you're good at, but like it becomes, you feel happier that you pushed yourself. It's like anything. If you're at the gym and you've done a deadlift of 120 kilos, next time you do 120, you're like, that was fucking pointless. But if you do 140, you're like, yes, I went a little bit further.
Jasky, thanks for coming on. Before we finish this, if people want to see your content, where do we go?
Just type in Sick Cunt anywhere on any of the channels with a double K, and they can find it on all the platforms. That's SIKKANT.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. That was enjoyable. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.